Okay, so today we're diving into something I think a lot of our listeners are already pretty familiar with, and that is the issue of, well, underpayment and overwork among immigrants.
Yeah.
So hopefully by the end of this deep dive, you'll have a much better grasp on all the kind of moving parts that are contributing to this problem, and what folks are trying to do to address it, right?
Exactly.
And I think one thing that might even surprise some people is how certain economic policies are actually contributing to this downward pressure on wages.
A race to the bottom.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So we'll get into all that and more.
Well, it's a very layered, complicated issue, and it's certainly not a new one.
Right.
I mean, we can trace these patterns, these exploitative patterns, back decades, even centuries.
Yeah. Okay. So let's rewind a little bit then. I mean, we often hear about historical exploitation, but what are some concrete examples of this?
Well, we can think about the early 20th century.
Right.
When European immigrants were flooding into the U.S. A lot of these immigrants, they were desperate for work, and so they ended up in these really dangerous factories, mines, enduring just horrendous conditions,
right,
for really shockingly low wages. It was really a system that kind of treated them as disposable labor, right?
Yeah.
And sadly, I think there are some real echoes of that, still in place today.
Right. So this is a pattern that we're seeing, sort of repeating itself throughout history. But how's it playing out in our modern economy? Is it just kind of like a continuation of these same problems, or are there new sort of forces at play?
It's a mix of both,
I think the historical context is really important, but I think there are also some modern economic policies that are kind of creating really fertile ground for this sort of exploitation, right?
Okay.
So for example, some policies, they really prioritize company profits over worker rights,
right?
And that leads to this surge in low-paying jobs. And this is especially the case, in industries where immigrant labor is really relied on.
Yeah.
So think like agriculture, construction.
Right.
The service industry.
Right. I imagine that kind of creates this really, really tough situation where employers, they can kind of take advantage, right?
Absolutely.
of workers who are desperate for any job.
Yeah, I mean, it becomes this sort of vicious cycle, right? Where employers, they can underpay.
They can deny benefits. They can overwork immigrant workers. Because they know that these workers, they're less likely to speak up or push back. Right. And unfortunately, there are also these cultural factors that can compound this vulnerability even more.
What do you mean by cultural factors?
Well, a lot of immigrants, they come from countries where labor protections, they're just not as strong.
Okay.
And so they may not even be aware of what their rights are here in the U.S.
Yeah, I mean, that makes them easy targets, I guess, for exploitation, right?
Yeah.
Especially when you throw in things like language barriers and the fear of deportation.
Exactly. It's kind of like it's almost like this perfect storm for exploitation, and this is especially true, for undocumented immigrants.
Right.
They're terrified of being reported and deported. Right. And so that lack of legal status, that makes them incredibly vulnerable to this kind of abuse.
Yeah. Okay. So we've laid out the historical context, the economic pressures, the cultural factors that are kind of contributing to this issue. But let's get specific. What does the data tell us about the actual scale of this problem?
Yeah. Well, the Economic Policy Institute, they found a really, really staggering disparity in wages. Their research shows that undocumented immigrants, they're disproportionately paid below minimum wage.
Wow.
Compared to native-born workers, right? And I think that's just a very clear sign of a system that's really rigged against them.
Yeah. Wow. That's a stark contrast. And it's not just about wages, right? I mean, there are other forms of exploitation that often go kind of go unnoticed.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the National Employment Law Project, they've documented significantly higher rates of wage theft among immigrant workers. They're also more likely to be subjected to unsafe working conditions,
Right.
And other kinds of abuses. It's a really troubling reality.
Yeah, it's really disheartening to hear, but it sounds like there are, organizations and advocates out there who are trying to fight back against.
Oh,
that.
absolutely. There are definitely groups, that are pushing for a living wage, better access to health care.
Yeah.
Stronger protections against wage theft, especially for these vulnerable immigrant workers.
Right. So it seems like, providing these workers with the knowledge, the resources, to even understand their rights, that seems crucial.
It's absolutely essential,
Yeah.
empowering them with that information. That's really key.
Mm-hmm.
And there are some really incredible labor rights organizations and legal aid groups that are out there doing really fantastic work. They're providing support. They're advocating for systemic change. It's
So we've covered a lot of ground here. I think it's pretty clear that this isn't just some simple problem with a simple solution. I mean, it's this web of historical exploitation, economic pressures, cultural barriers, legal complexities.
It really is.
Right.
It's a lot, and it kind of raises this really crucial question for all of us. How can we use this understanding, right?
Yeah.
To actually advocate for a more equitable, a more just system for all workers.
Right. Yeah.
regardless of their background. I think it's a challenge.
Yeah.
But it's a fight worth having.
It really is. It really is. All right. Well, that's all the time we have for today.
Great.
Yeah. Thanks for joining us. It was great having you on.
My pleasure.
And for all of you listening out there, we really encourage you to keep digging into this topic,
Yeah.
and think about the implications.
Absolutely.
We'll catch you next time.
See you later.